Hello and welcome to Broadcast. My name is Tom and we are live on our YouTube channel and also on our podcast feed. So please do give us a like and subscribe or a rating and review depending on where you're watching or listening to this. Broadcast is a conversation partner for people on the front lines of ministry. And today we are getting into the topic of church planting and particularly the practical foundations for a church plant. This is the beginning of a new series that sits alongside our Biblical Foundation series that's gone up recently. We're now digging into some of those practical questions. How do we go from a conviction that God's word calls us to this ministry into a specific thinking through of, well, how do we actually do it on the ground, in real life, in the situations before us? What does it look like? Over the next few sessions, we're going to be digging into some of the things we need to be thinking about in our lives, in our church plants, as we look to put this kind of biblical mandate into practice in our neighborhoods or the places that we might feel God is asking us to go. And this session is going to start with the question of calling. So we're going to look at, is church planting something that God wants me to do right now? That's the question we need to ask, isn't it? If we're convinced that church planting is biblical, if we're convinced it's important, if we're convinced it's something that is part of God's plan for the world, then we've got to ask, well, okay, how do I play my part in it? Is it something for me and is it something for now? And we could answer that question in different ways that range from the more general answers to the more specific answers. So on a general level, then the answer is clearly yes, isn't it? Yes, God is calling each and every one of us to church planting. How do we know that? Well, because we are part of the church. We are disciples of Jesus who've received the Great Commission, that we're to go and make disciples of all nations. And then those original disciples who heard that were to teach us to obey everything they were instructed, including the mandate to make more disciples of all the nations. So as part of the church, we've got this missionary call of God to go. And as we've seen in our Biblical Foundations course, how do we go? Well, we don't just go focused on the individual, but we go on different places, go on mission, focused on building church and pioneering new churches, as the example of Jesus and the book of Acts shows us. So from a general perspective, each one of us is called to this ministry of church planting. And there might be an argument to say, rather than wait for a specific clear instruction that's personal to me, that we've already got our marching orders, let's just crack on and do things. I think that argument does have a lot of merit to it, actually, particularly in the early stages of exploration, particularly in when we're looking at, well, what might I do? Or what might I get involved in? Or how might I support something that a friend is doing? Maybe I'll get involved in a church plant near me for a bit of time. In the absence of God saying, stay where you are or do something else, there could be an argument to dip a toe in the water. But eventually there comes a point, and the deeper you get into church planting, the need for this becomes a bit more prominent, I think. You'd want the personal and specific sense as well of God is asking me to do this. I think it's important for a number of reasons that God is calling you to this thing. Because there are actually lots of things we can do, aren't there, to serve the advance of God's kingdom. There are lots of places we might go. There are lots of ministries we might be involved in. And there are lots of different ways that we might choose to serve. How do we know that this is the right one? How do we know that this is the one that God wants us to do right now? And how can we have the conviction of that to a sufficiently firm level that when things get hard, we're not going to say, oh, well, maybe I'll just try something else instead, that we stick the course through the challenges. This sense of a personal and specific calling can be really helpful in guiding us through and keeping us strong through the challenges that come. And I would say the more that is at stake in being involved in church planting, the more certain you want to be. And so the more you want this kind of more specific kind of calling. So To take an example, a question of will you be leading the church plant or not is really significant in how much calling you want. Because let's say you're not leading the plant, then maybe the way you get involved in it is saying to your friend or the person who is leading it, you know what, I will get involved. I'm planning to definitely over the next year be involved in this church plant, and let's see what happens, and maybe I'll be around longer after that. You'll actually be a really useful person to that church plant. Later in the series, we'll talk about the merit of people who are scaffolding, who help in the early stages get something built. And if that's the kind of engagement, maybe you don't need this sense of, I've been specifically told to do this. Maybe you can see the need, you can see your own gifting, you can see that it would be helpful. And if a few months down the line, you hear God specifically lead you into something different, then that church plant will be fine. It can carry on without you. It's a different matter if you're going to be leading it. It's built a lot more around you. At that point, if God guides you into something else, it would be much more difficult to extract yourself from it. So will you be leading it or not is a big question really on what level of calling you need. Another one would be, will you be moving house or not? Like, do you already live in the place where the church plant is happening? Because if it means that you need to uproot your whole community, you need to leave your job, you need to leave your home, you need to leave your friendship group and go somewhere else out on a limb, well, maybe you want a stronger sense of, yeah, this is something that God has really asked me to do, than if it's quite near where you live. If you've already got your job, you've already got your friendship group, and you're supporting the new church community, the stakes are a bit lower. Perhaps the specificity of calling might need to be a bit lower as well. Like asking the question, what happens if this doesn't work? Like, am I kind of just stranded on my own in a new place, or is the rest of my life and infrastructure basically as it was? That's a useful question to think about. And will you being a part of it involve other people or not? Obviously, this depends a bit on your family situation. If you're married, how does your spouse feel about it? Do they have a sense from God that this is what we are meant to do? Or is it mainly just coming from you? That's quite important. If it is God speaking, then you can afford to be patient and trust that God will speak to the partner as well. And it might take the two of you different time scales to get there. It might be kind of different moments that are significant. But if you're doing it together, and particularly if one or the other is less keen, this sense of shared calling in it becomes more important again. And similarly with children as well. If you've got children, what do they feel about it? Is this a shared family adventure that you all want to do, or is it something they're being dragged into against their desire? Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say this is a kind of deal breaker always. On the other hand, I can think of plenty of situations where parents have moved and kids have ended up resenting it, and the church plant has become viewed really negatively by the children of those who've moved to be a part of it. Some have even lost their faith in that kind of context. If you're moving in that kind of way, the shared specific call together is so powerful, and it's worth waiting for. You can afford to go more slowly to bring a shared sense of calling if God is in it, because you can trust if it's God speaking, then God will speak and he'll make happen what he's talking about. So I guess the question is, how do you know whether God is calling you? Let's say you're in one of those categories where quite a bit is being staked, where it would make sense to have that really specific idea that this is what God has got for me. How do you actually know whether God is calling you into church planting or not? And there are different ingredients that come together. There's no one size fits all, like tick, tick, tick. But there are different things to look for. And really, you're wanting to see as many of these as you possibly can. And I guess it starts with that subjective sense of God speaking to you. So whatever you want to refer to it as, that like inner sense, or that kind of prophetic voice, or maybe it's an audible voice you hear, but this kind of way, like God has said this to me. Like think about in the Bible when Paul sees the Macedonian man, and he's like, oh, I think God is telling me, like, that's where I need to go. Now, he'd heard some guidance from God in that prophetic way, in that supernatural way that made him go to that place. I remember years ago, I was living in London, but whenever I was praying, I just kept having a sense of God impressing on me two things, like Manchester and church planting. And neither were things that I'd really been giving much thought to prior to that, but I just couldn't shake it. Whenever I was praying, those things kept coming to mind for me. It's like, okay, there's that sense here that God might be saying something, that there might be a sense of calling to a particular place and to a particular thing. And when you get that sense, that's not the end of the process. It's not like, oh, well, I think God might be saying this. Right, I'm packing my bags and I'm off today. That's the start of an exploration. That's the start of I want to dig in and I want to see, is this thing that has been popping into my mind that I'm starting to think I'm hearing, is this from God? And so to commit, like, I'm going to pray for this. I'm going to pray about this in a more deliberate way. Like before, I was just praying and thought like Manchester was popping into my mind. Okay, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to pray about Manchester. I'm going to specifically ask God, like, hey, God, is this what you're saying to me? Is this a calling for me? And is it a calling for quite soon, or is it more in the future? Like, help me understand this guidance, like, as well as the prayer, like fasting in this time is really helpful in trying to discern, like, what is it God is saying to me? And really what you want to see happen is kind of a settled peace within you about whatever it is. And this peace doesn't mean kind of passivity. There can be an excitement, there can be a nervous energy, like there often is when you're talking about something new or outside the comfort zone. But when I say a peace, what I mean is where you don't have inside you like a spiritual check, where there's nothing deep within you. Oh, I'm not sure about this. Like something doesn't feel right about it. If you're having that kind of feeling, that's maybe a warning flag that perhaps you've not heard God as clearly as you thought. It's like, are you having to convince yourself? Are you having to force this through kind of against what seems like your better judgment? If that's the case, you've not got the settled peace about it. Doesn't mean abandon it entirely, but it's probably one to just sit with and keep praying about more and look and see if at some point in the future that peace comes. It might well be that God is saying church planting, or he might be saying a specific place, but he might be saying, but not now. That's one for the future for you. With this sense as well of God speaking, God saying something to you, it's really helpful at this point to start speaking to friends who you trust. See what other people have to say. Does this sit right with them? I think sometimes we can be a bit individualistic when it comes to hearing God's voice. It's like, well, I think I've heard, and so that will win. That will be the deal breaker. So I can't hear what anyone else has to say. Because, hey, God has said to me. We can miss the wise cautions other people have to offer. Trusted friends who know as well are really helpful in discerning God's voice. They see where we are. And again, it doesn't mean that what we think God might be saying to us isn't right, but maybe they can help refine it. Maybe they can help us understand or discern. I think God might be saying church planting, but he might be saying support a church plant rather than lead one. He might be saying yes to church planting, but now isn't the moment for that. Perhaps they see kind of within you that you've still got a bit of growing up to do. Your life circumstances might not be a good match for it. And where you are, things are happening that are good. And they might caution you to wait. Or I remember in my circumstance, when I was first exploring church planting, was also coming up to the time I was just about to get married. And so some of the wisdom that myself and my fiance at the time, now my wife, were given was just go a bit slower with this. Like, build the life you're building together first, and then look at the church planting stuff afterwards. Really helpful wisdom from other people. It may be that what God is saying to you is for years in the future. That was true with Abraham as well, wasn't it? Like, he got a promise from God that he'd get a child. It was like 25 years before then God fulfilled what he'd spoken, but he was living with the promise. We can be in a rush sometimes if we think God has spoken. And while we're talking about other people, again, we spoke about it earlier, but what does your spouse think? What do your kids think? Are they feeling like this is the will of God? This is the calling of God upon us as a family? Or if they're resistant or holding back, then again, that's significant. You wouldn't want to be going in that situation, particularly if your spouse isn't on board with it. And then the other person who's really important to talk about, or people it's really important to talk about when we're speaking about discerning the voice of God, is your current church leaders. Like, these are people who have a shepherding responsibility over you, and so you want to be speaking to them like, I feel God is saying this. What do you think? Like, how does that sit with you? Do you think God might be in this, and hear their wisdom and take it on board? You've entrusted them with a stewardship of your spiritual life and your soul. So their wisdom is so important. And if they have questions or doubts, then take them very seriously. When it comes to the sending church, really there are three places that they might land if you're to go church planting. One of them is sending. So it might be that when they hear what God is saying to you, or what you think God is saying to you, they say, yeah, this is something that we feel like God is in, and we want to get behind. We want to invest in this. We want to make this something that we do as a church, to send you to the place that God is talking about, send you to the particular place you're going to church plant, which means they'll carry some ownership for it. They'll be praying for you. They'll often be supporting you financially. They might send a few other people with you. They'll keep an ongoing relationship. There'll probably be people coming in to help guide you and your team, maybe preach at the church plant. And it'll really be something that is done by the church with you involved in it. Or that's sending, or they might bless you as you go, which is not the same thing. Like, they might say, you know what, we do think God is in this. We do sense that this is the right thing for you to do. We think you have heard God correctly. It's a good idea. It's not where we're at as a church right now to invest in that kind of way. We probably won't be able to carry it in the same way. We won't be able to pray for it as much. I'm sure they'd still pray some. We won't be able to invest the same level of finance or people or ongoing relationship, but we know you're connected in with whatever other church or ministry, and you go with the absolute best wishes in the world. We are totally behind you. That's kind of blessing you as you go. And then I guess the third way is releasing you, which is where there are misgivings from the current church, where they say, like, you know what, we're not sure about this. We're not sure this is a good idea, either because of the timing of it, or maybe because of something in you that isn't quite ready for it, or maybe about the place, or whatever the circumstances are. So we're not sure. We've counselled you against this, but you're determined. You're going to do it anyway. Okay, off you go. And so they might choose to send or bless or release. If it's in the releasing territory, that would be a big red flag. I think that should give us pause for thought. It's like, I'm not sure I want to do this. Ideally, you want to be in the sending place, where you're sent, where you've kind of worked it through with those leaders, where they're as invested in it as you and as the team that's actually going on the ground. Blessing can work in some circumstances, particularly if you're well connected and there's a relationship with another church that's going to take on that sending responsibility, maybe kind of more local to where you will be planting. That can work as well. But sending really is the setup that you want there. But with any of these ingredients, this kind of internal sense, or this settled peace, or the encouragement of others that this is God's word, including church leaders, including family members like spouse and children, including trusted friends, when any of those things are missing, that should give us some serious pause for thought. Like, is this actually the right thing? Is this actually a calling for this moment in time, especially when the stakes are high in the church planting? Now, the last piece of it, which I'll mention, but maybe isn't quite the same level of red flag if it's absent, is what I'd call supernatural confirmation. Like, is there something that that God has done that is just unexplainable without it being God, that really puts the cherry on the cake of, yeah, God has definitely called me to do this. I remember when I was exploring what I thought God was saying about Manchester, and I think I had come to a bit of a settled peace. I'd started talking it around with different people around me, but I thought what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to Manchester for a day. I'm not going to tell anyone that I've done this, and I'm just going to walk the streets, and I'm just going to see what happens and learn a bit of the city, but also just have time for God to speak to me. So I did. I got the train up from London, and I got out of the train station, and I started praying. And my first prayer on that day was like, God, if you want me to come here, would you give me some kind of confirmation of that today while I'm here? And then I prayed that prayer, and then kind of went on my way. Bit of exploring, bit of praying, and just kind of seeing what I saw. I remember that afternoon then I was walking down a back street, and I was praying at that moment, and there was a man walking down the road towards me, and he was talking to himself. I'm not sure if there was mental health challenges or like what the reason was, but he was talking words that didn't really make sense until he got to me. And then he just looked at me and said, "This is a sign from God." And then he went on his way. And I was blown away that had happened, because I'd said, God, I want a confirmation today. I want you to give me a sign if you want me to come to this place. And I got a man saying to me, this is a sign from God, exactly what I'd asked for. And for me, that was that confirmation of, yeah, God has called you to this place. And I held on to that as I was then working towards coming up here, as I was involved in different things here and the challenges of it. That's something I've come back to many times, that God has called me here, and that strengthened me through what was to come. And that's one of the big things that this sense of calling can do. It can make us persevere when things get hard. Like, I think about Paul in the city of Corinth and having the dream where Jesus said to him, like, I've got many people in this city. And this sense of Jesus having a purpose in Corinth that Paul was to be involved in, just how reassuring that would be for Paul as persecution, as hardship came in that place. Church planting is hard, it can be difficult, and it can be tempting to quit quickly when the challenges come. And one of the things that calling does is it helps keep you in the room long enough for it to start working, for you to come through the other side of those challenges and to see this community come together that you've been trying to build. Calling really reassures you on those nights where it's like, oh, there's 5 of us here, and we've not added anyone new for quite a while now, and it just feels like hard. It feels like we're churning really tough ground. Yeah, but God's called me to this place. It really does make a difference. It also gives you fuel for prayer. As you're pleading with God, as you're asking of God, you can plead back to him those things he's already said, like the way he's called you, whatever the internal sense was or the kind of supernatural confirmation. As you're praying, you can bring those things back to him. God, you said, and so I'm here. So would you do whatever it is that God was speaking about? Your calling can also be a bit of a compass. As you're making some of the big decisions in the life of your church plan about, I don't know, where you meet or what kind of church you're going to build or who you're going to invest in for leadership and responsibility, returning back to this original call, like what is it that God was saying? What is it that God was asking us to do here? Can really help you stay tethered on what it is you're trying to build and not get swayed in all different directions as things come up. But one of the big challenges, I think, when we have a sense of calling is being able to carry it with the appropriate humility. There's a balance between walking with an assuredness of I'm doing this because God has said, but still being open and flexible and teachable to the wisdom of others. I've noticed sometimes people can use words like God said as a bit of a trump card to shut down any conversation, as though, well, yeah, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to listen to anyone else. I've had this thing from God, which isn't always helpful. Like sometimes the wisdom of others can be so helpful in understanding what it is that God said or how it works, or maybe there are other ways to live out what God has said, and perhaps we've got an overly rigid read on what it means sometimes, where the wisdom of others would help us refine what God has been saying to us. And so carrying this sense of calling, but carrying it with humility and receptivity, is really important. And also just to say that a sense of calling doesn't always mean success. We know that not every church plant grows into a thriving church. We know that not every church planter ends up leading their team long term. And that doesn't mean that the calling they received wasn't real. That might well be God speaking. And if a church plant ends up being around for a couple of years and doing some good in the lives of the people it connects with, or if it ends up becoming an established church that's around for the next 100 years, either way, what you hear may be the call of God. And if you end up leading that church long term, or you hand it on to someone else, it might still be God who called you into it. Calling does not always mean things go the way you hope. And we see this in scripture, don't we? Like, look at someone like Jeremiah, who preached faithfully for decades, but saw very little fruit. Or Paul would labour to build church in places that then we see in history, the church struggled or even collapsed, like not long after Paul had left. Or even in the ministry of Jesus, we see after 3 years, by the end, the group around him is pretty small. Calling doesn't always mean things will go the way we hoped, but God still speaks. It's not a guarantee, but it is an invitation into God's purposes to partner with him in his mission in the world. And God's purposes are bigger than any single church plant. I've been involved with a few church plants, some which are still going, some which aren't. But it's very important we see it this way, because if not, we end up thinking about our own church plant with an overinflated sense of bravado. You might have heard talk about main character syndrome, like when a person is always bringing conversation back to themselves and always making everything about them. Well, church planters can do this all the time with their church plant. Look, God's called me. This is the most important thing. God's purposes are way bigger than any of our church plants. And sometimes if we don't see that and don't recognize that God's calling might be true, whether or not the church works out, then if it doesn't work out, we might carry a sense of shame out of it. A doubt, did I ever hear God in the first place? Well, chances are you did. Like, God may well have been speaking, particularly if it was confirmed, if it was affirmed by those around you as well. And that's okay. Our call is to be obedient to what God is asking us to do. And let this sense of calling be a journey. It's not that God speaks to us once and then it's done, but allow God to keep speaking, to keep refining things, to clarify or elaborate or redirect us into the new thing as well. Life is a journey, and it's a journey with God, and we're expecting that through that journey, we will be continually hearing God speak and hearing God guide. But in the meantime, if you are exploring church planting, I would encourage you to get to that place of prayer, to listen to what God might be saying to you, to talk it around with those around you, see what they think, and see how God guides you. Or if it's a low stakes thing, if it's supporting your friend who's planting down the road, then maybe while you're discerning your future, to get involved and to support the mission of God in the world. This is our first session of the Practical Foundations for Church Planting course. We've looked at calling, and I hope it's been helpful to you. We're going to be back soon with more content from this series where we get into this idea of vision. If God's calling you to do something, how do we get the sense then of what it is that he's asking us to do and what our church plan should be about. So do please follow the channel to keep up to date with us. Please do head over to our website as well, where you'll find a lot more content from the Broadcast Network. You can find that at www.thebroadcastnetwork.org, and we will be back soon with more content. See you next time.